Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is very exciting for us. We've spent the last year in Livnos having classes and learning about Sarah Schenirer and about her students. So it's very exciting to be able to take part in this tradition where we just all gather and just spend time talking about Sarah Schenirer, really just her, as we'll see, her incredible personality, who she was, and also to see how that really impacted her students, how it impacted the Jewish people, and to see that this is something which we should keep in mind is a model for who we can be. It's not just talking about someone who lived and did something extraordinary, but it's really a blueprint for how we can also live our lives. So this is the 91st Yahrtzeit, which again, it's just overwhelming that this, I think they usually do it on the 10-year anniversary. They have huge gatherings, right? This was a woman who, although, people who knew her are no longer with us, her, who she was is so overwhelming that it becomes it's still such an important day for the Jewish people, right? And for us women to gather to talk about who she was. So she passed away in 1935 at the age of 52. And just to keep in mind how much she accomplished in a short life, right? One of the things she taught her students is the importance of using every moment, that every moment counts. She barely slept. She was always working, always using her time well. And that's something that you see when you learn about her life. You realize that this was someone who she understood how precious every moment was. She never wasted a minute. So this should be Le'iloi Nishmas, Sarah Bas Betzalel, and also it should be Refuah Shalima for Esya Bas Edel. So Mir Hashem, we should have many, many, many years of being able to commemorate this beautiful, beautiful day in the Jewish year. Before we start, let's just say a parak of Tehillim together. Shir Lamalos Asanai Ala Rime Ayin Yavo Ezri. Ezri Me'im Adonai Osei Shemayim Va'aretz. Al Yitain Lamot Raglacha Al Yanum Shomracha. Hine Lo Yanum V'Lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael. Adonai Shomracha, Adonai Tzilcha Al Yad Yaminecha. Yomam Hashemesh Li'akeka V'Yarech Ba'Layla. Adonai Yishmarcha Mikol Ra, Yishmar Es Nafshacha. Adonai Yishmar Tzizcha B'Wacha Me'ata V'Ad Olam. Okay, now let's begin. I just want to mention that as we do this, this is really like an informal session. So, if anyone wants to join in, ask questions, please feel free. So before we start, I just wanted to mention a story that to me really shows in a very summarized way the impact that she had on all of those around her, on her students, which really goes beyond something we can imagine. If you haven't yet learned about Sarah Schenirer, right? So it might be that she seems like this, someone who was just kind of a teacher and she had a good idea. She started schools for girls and, someone who like, okay, she had a good idea. Maybe she was like a little bit businessy and, decided to start this new movement and start schools. But what we're going to see is that who she was to her students, who she was as a person and the impact that she made really had nothing to do with, with like, what time school started. It was who she was, created an impact because of who she was. And we're going to see that Beis Yaakov is about much more than starting schools. That is an important thing. Torah is the basis of everything that we do. And she understood that. And therefore, she believed in learning and she taught women to learn. But we're going to see that it wasn't just an academic experience. It was an experience of what it means to be a Torah Jew. So let's look at that together. This beautiful story about her. Now, most of what we're going to talk about today comes from two books, Carry Me in Your Heart and To Vanquish the Dragon, which are both by Pearl Banish, one of Sarah Schneer's students. And Pearl Banish, you see what it meant to grow up in Krakow, knowing Sarah Schenirer. It was overwhelming. And so Pearl Banish talks about throughout Carry Me in Your Heart, she talks about Sarah Schenirer and the Beis Yaakov movement and what an impact that had on her, on the Jewish world, like so many different personalities that were involved in the movement. And that did incredible things. And then in To Vanquish the Dragon, Pearl Banish talks about her experience and her friends' experiences in the Holocaust and how Beis Yaakov gave them the strength to confront those challenges, to stand up to the Nazis. And we're going to see here, here she says something that really sums this up. It happened one Thursday night in Krakow in 1932. We were celebrating Rosh Chodesh with a special evening program, as we did each month. We read and recited from the monthly paper that we published. One girl gave a speech. A few others performed a skit on something related to current events. Everyone in Benos attended, about 500 girls in all. Benos was part of Beis Yaakov. Suddenly, the door opened and Frau Schenirer entered. Even today, I picture her vividly as she walked to the left-hand corner of the room and sat down. She was tired. She had just come from the railroad station after a week of traveling from town to town, visiting Beis Yaakov schools, talking to the children, asking them questions, and complimenting them on their achievements. How they loved those visits. Most of all, however, she came to visit the young teachers, bolster their morale, help them with their problems, and give them new teaching materials that she had prepared. Her shoes were dusty, her clothing wrinkled. She placed her heavy black briefcase on the floor. I see her closing her eyes. She cannot keep them open. She is exhausted, yet she came. Not to give a lecture at the seminary, not even to teach a class at Benos. She came to her Benos girls just to join them for a Rosh Chodesh evening, to listen to them and take pride in their accomplishments. She opens her eyes from time to time, not only to listen, but to see her dear children. Now that the speech and the recitations are over, the girls start singing and dancing. Frau Schenirer steps into the circle. Never mind her exhaustion. She is there full of joy and vigor, joining the girls in dance and song. Now she sings V'tar Lebeinu, purify our hearts, with the girls. Hands outstretched and face uplifted, she turns to heaven. Oh God, purify our hearts that we can serve you in truth. She dances with us and sings, but it is a prayer, not a song. Now she sings it in Yiddish, again imploring Hashem to keep our hearts pure so we may serve him in truth. Years passed after that magical evening, bitter, tragic years of pain, torture, and agony. In Auschwitz, there were times when we were so cruelly beaten that we could no longer recite Tehillim, recall the lessons we had learned, or even think. But one thing stood out: the sight of Frau Schenirer, with her outstretched hands and uplifted face, singing and praying, begging Hashem, V'tar Lebeinu, purify our hearts. In that valley of death, that dungeon of existence, surrounded only by ugliness and bestiality, we prayed with her. Dear God, help us to keep our hearts pure, lest we become beasts like them. Make us able, even under these circumstances, to love, to care, to help others, to keep ourselves pure as you willed, Hashem, and to serve you in truth. Right? Overwhelming to think about the fact that one of the themes that we've discussed in our courses this past year is that Sarah Schenirer was teaching these little girls. They would, come to her house and she would tell them, Hashem created the world and look at how beautiful the world is and the skies and the land and the food. And, she would give them these little lessons. And those lessons that she was telling them, I don't know if she realized, but she was preparing them for the heroism that they displayed in the war years, the things that they did. I really can't recommend enough that you read Carry Me in Your Heart and To Vanquish the Dragon. It shows how powerful it is when someone has proper chinuch. They have the ability to become warriors of the Jewish people, to stand up to beasts, to do whatever has to be done, to be brave, to be compassionate, to be strong. It's overwhelming to see. We don't really understand the power of what a true Torah education is. It should make us into people who are warriors, who are able to weaponize Torah and to live lives that are again loving, that are strong, that are here Pearl Banish talks about in those days when she was in Auschwitz. Like, how could anyone prepare someone for going through Auschwitz? And yet Sarah Schenirer, being who she was, loving the girls, dancing with them, showing them how much she loved Hashem, that prepared them to do things that are beyond what we can imagine any human is capable of. And that's something that you see with Carry Me in Your Heart. It talks a lot about the Beis Yaakov movement. And then in To Vanquish the Dragon, you see, okay, here's how they apply those lessons. Those are lessons about, how to, make sure you make a bracha like clear, and make sure you this, and, make sure you come every day with, you look dignified. All of those lessons that they took that seem like, nice lessons. What it did was created a certain kind of being that was able to do things that are beyond. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about what Sarah Schenirer gave to them, who she was, and then we're going to see how they use that, and they use it as tools to remain Tzelem Elokim. What Pearl Banish says is we use those tools to remain at Tzelem Elokim, even as we were surrounded by the the ugly Nazi beasts. So first of all, I think the first important lesson of Beis Yaakov, and again, if anyone wants to chime in or anything or add anything to the chat, I'll be looking at that as well. I think one of the main lessons of Beis Yaakov is that Sarah Schenirer, she came from a regular Hasidic family. Um, in her 30s, she was still single, and she was very passionate about serving Hashem. From the time she was young, she was very passionate about learning, and she really wanted to spread how beautiful it is to live a Torah life, how lucky we are to serve Hashem. And what she saw around her is that it was a time when there was so much assimilation, right? Women until that point had been educated in their homes. They were sheltered. They were, part of the Jewish community. And then at this point, women were attending public schools, and there was really no place in the Jewish community for them to socialize or to learn or to grow. And so instead of being at home, they were in public school all day, and then they were attending youth groups, and they were really, assimilating into that society. And they didn't really have opportunities for learning Torah and for seeing what the Torah and the Torah community has to offer. And in her 30s, she, was trying to figure out how she can help. How can she help those around her to recognize what a privilege we have to be part of the Jewish people, right? And to use that well and to recognize Hashem when so many people were drifting. And so, a number of events like gave her some direction on what to do. And she started to try to put together a few programs, right, to help different women to again connect to the Torah community, to learn Torah, right, to be part of that community. However, what you might not have known is that she started a few programs that didn't work, that failed. And when she first started to decide, on establishing Beis Yaakov, she, would approach different people, try to get different people to be interested, try to start with different groups of girls, of young women. And people were really not interested. The older generation who hadn't been part of this problem didn't see a need for this. They had been educated at home. They didn't see why this was important. The younger generation was already, like the young women were already totally like assimilating. They weren't interested in what she had to say, right? The more religious felt like, what is this innovation? We don't need it, right? The less religious, they weren't interested in connecting back to Torah, right? So really nobody was interested. Everyone was just totally like, there was no audience. And she was trying different things and nothing seemed to be working. And eventually in 1918, she tried another group. And she was able to gather 7 little girls who were too young at that point to have been impacted by what was going on. And their families saw because of neighbors, because of other family members, that if the children weren't protected from a young age, right, they would go the way of everyone else and end up assimilating. So she started with these little girls, 7 little girls in 1918. And finally, this was successful. And this was in 1918. By 1925, there were 49 Beis Yaakovs, right, in different places. And there were over 6,500 students. Okay. And 7 years later, there were over 6,500 students. Now, again, it wasn't her first thing that she tried to establish. The other things they weren't successful and she had to close those. But this finally took off and it grew exponentially. And of course, we see today, right, how much it thrives, right? Today, so many students in Beis Yaakov, so many schools everywhere, right? That's just a part of the Jewish community. But even more than, her success of how many Beis Yaakovs there are and how many students, right? If you read about her students, right, and we'll talk about them, what you see is that it's not just about the quantity of what she created, it's the quality, that these girls were such heroes and they were true students of Sarah Schenirer. They truly continued her legacy. They were people who were able to balance incredible strength and bravery and, pursuit of truth with compassion, with warmth, with, fun personalities. Like they were really just like it's hard to imagine that people like her students, like she and her students actually existed. Like her and her students actually existed. But when you see these stories, it's like, wow, to know what a human being can be. And that's what she saw. She knew that she needed to raise heroes of the Jewish people. And that's what she did. And that's what she accomplished. And so, she may have not been successful the first few times, but when it was right and, and it was working, it was a huge success. Now, again, I think that's really important, because here we are, like I I was so excited when I went a few months ago to my niece's Chumash play, and the girls were there, and they were singing all these songs about how lucky we are to have the Torah to serve Hashem. And you see the principals and the teachers; they were so passionate and giving over this Masorah to this new, new group of girls, 7 year olds who, haven't yet had the privilege to learn Chumash, and now this is going to start them on a lifelong journey. And they were talking about what a privilege it is to be us, to have what we have, to have a lifelong profession of learning Torah, of applying the Torah to our lives, of being people who are Torah people. And it was overwhelming to see that 100 years after Sarah Schenirer started Beis Yaakov in Krakow, and people were doubting and people were mocking, and they barely had any money. And she supported them. She was a seamstress, and so she continued to work as a seamstress at night while the girls were sleeping in her little apartment. They would sleep in her apartment. She would feed them. She would take care of them, and she would support them by doing her sewing at night and preparing classes at night. I mean, it's like you think about this, like who could have thought that this would work, right? How many people would try such a thing nowadays? So many people, sending her the message of like this can't possibly work, right? How many people would ever do something like that nowadays? Work so hard, even when it seems like an impossible challenge, right? And here the thing is, 100 years later, we have 7 year old girls in Queens, in Lakewood, in Dallas, all over, in Eretz Yisrael, in Australia. We have girls all over the place who are being given this message of you are now entering into this special, unique group, right? An elite group of people who get to learn the Torah and who get to live according to the Torah. And that's possible because of what Sarah Schenirer did, because of the vision. She knew when she started that there might be a lot of people doubting her. It might be difficult. There were a lot of obstacles. There were a lot of challenges, but it was worth it because she knew that in 100 years from now, there are going to be a group of girls in Florida who are singing the song V'tahir Libinu, and so excited that they get to have the privilege of learning Chumash. So excited. And so that was worth, she kept going because she had something more important. It wasn't about, okay, having to stay up at night, or it was about the larger vision that she had, that she was committed to. And she didn't let anyone stop her. She didn't doubt herself. She didn't let anyone's doubt, creep into her mind. Instead, she just stayed the course. And because of that, we have what we have today. And I think, that is what it means to be a hero, right? People who, don't try or don't give up aren't able to accomplish things. But people who try, maybe the first time they're not successful, maybe it's really hard, maybe they have to try 50 times, but they keep trying. And that's heroism. That's heroism. And eventually from that, it blossoms into something beautiful. And again, we know if you look at Jewish history, you see that everyone who started something, it was hard. It's not supposed to be easy. It's otherwise, what would be the greatness in that? But it takes people who are heroes, who are people of strength and commitment, who are willing to do whatever has to be done. Whatever has to be done, try their best and let Hashem do what he needs to, but they're going to try their best. And that's what it means to be a hero of the Jewish people. And those are the people who go down in history as changing everything, right? As impacting the entire Jewish world. And here's a beautiful line that one of her students mentions. Another great source for learning about the Beis Yaakov movement or learning about other incredible women in the Jewish community is Daughters of Destiny. It goes through different women and it talks about their stories. And it has a few chapters on Sarah Schenirer. And one of her students says here, it was her courage and idealism that made her pick up the rocks thrown at her by violent opponents to Beis Yaakov. Rocks in hand, she would turn to her Talmidos saying, we will take these rocks and turn them into bricks with which we will build Beis Yaakov. And she did just that. And that is really, that itself was such a lesson. The students talk about as they went through their lives, again, like who could have imagined that a few years later, her students would go through Auschwitz. Most of them were, sadly, most of them were killed, right? But those who survived were, of course, had gone through so much trauma, had lost their families, had been through so much suffering. The communities that they had known were destroyed. The Beis Yaakov schools they had known were destroyed, right? But with all of that, they continued after that to build the Jewish community. During the war years, they would provide strength and hope to all of those around them. And after the war years, they would go wherever they would go and they would build new families. They would build new Beis Yaakovs. They would build new communities. And they would also act as mothers to people who had been through the war and needed someone loving to help, to help bring them out of that that period. And her students, they had that. Nothing was ever too much. Nothing was ever too scary, too hard, too impossible. If it had to be done, they did it. And that was how they did it. That was how we see what Beis Yaakov is today, was because all of those women who came to America, to Eretz Israel, to England, to South Africa, wherever they went, they had this vision with them that no matter what, we have to establish Beis Yaakov. And even if it's hard, it's okay. We'll take those rocks and with them we'll build Beis Yaakov. And I think it's so important again to remember like who we're talking about. Sarah Schenirer wasn't from the most chashuv family in in Poland, and she wasn't from the Gedolei Hador, and she wasn't some woman who had all the like most chashuv yichus resume around. She was a regular woman from an unknown family, an unknown woman, a woman whose resume in a lot of external ways like today or in her time was not necessarily what like most people would find impressive, right? She got married later, but she never had kids, right? By the time she started Beis Yaakov, she wasn't married yet, right? And again, a woman in her 30s, like this is something which a lot of people could feel like embarrassed, maybe feel like they don't have the right to start something. And again, they're not chashuv and they're not married to a rav and they're not, or a lot of people might even, judge someone else who wants to start something. But it's important to remember is that all of that is just like, it's so not a Torah way of looking at something, right? What matters is that Sarah Schneer, in her situation, she understood that she has something huge to accomplish in this world. And even though it might not have been what we normally, hope for how a person's life looks, in the end, she accomplished so much more. She went so beyond, right? What a person can imagine. Like, how is it possible someone accomplished so much in her life? And her students talk about how motherly she was to them and how they truly felt like they had a parent-child relationship with her, and that the impact they had, the impact that she had on their lives. Like they talk about how, when she passed away, like her children mourned her, that she left more children in this world than almost anyone in history. She was truly a mother to the entire Jewish people and a mother to thousands and thousands of students whose lives she completely changed and who she formed. Like she gave them so much. And so again, life doesn't always happen the way we think it should or the way we think it will. And sometimes we might even like have a little bit of doubt of like, who am I to start this chesed organization or to champion this cause or to do this. But to remember that that's not how the Torah looks at these things. The Torah expects us to go beyond that, to remember that each of us are Tzelem Elokim. We have so much potential. We have so much we can accomplish. And the Torah demands of us to accomplish so much, right? And if you look at so many people in history who, again, their lives maybe weren't like the resume that everyone, thinks they should have, right? But they accomplished so much and they saved the Jewish people because they made the decision to do whatever had to be done. And again, that's really heroism. And heroism doesn't come from doubting ourselves or thinking we're not capable of doing stuff. One of the things that her students talk about is that she always gave them the message that you can accomplish anything. You can accomplish anything. You have the responsibility as Torah women to go out, to teach the world, to teach your students, your families, what it means, what we have, what it means to be part of the Torah mission. And that was something that she modeled for them, that you can do anything. And so they felt that deeply, right? That was part of who they became also. And, again, like I think just to recognize what Sarah Schenirer has done, in every school, right? But for sure in Livnos also, right? That's something which we've been able to model so much after a lot of what she started to try to emulate how she established different things. And personally, I got so much chizuk when I was starting Livnos from what she had done, to see that it wasn't like she started something and overnight it became this huge success, or that everybody agreed and everyone clapped when she walked in the room. At first, it was really hard. There was a lot of struggle. There were a lot of failures, but failures that she used to continue on and to grow and to learn from it, to try new things. And to see that like that's how it works. It's not supposed to be that overnight people become a huge success. It's supposed to be that with time and with commitment and with perseverance, right? Eventually, Mir Hashem, there'll be a success. Or even if it's not a success in certain external ways, it doesn't mean it wasn't a success when someone tries, right? We're just supposed to try and to do what we can to, make the world a better place. And Hashem decides what's successful. But for sure, we should never be, we should never stop just because it wasn't an immediate success and, everything didn't work out perfectly on day one, right? These things take time. And when someone is doing it sincerely for the real reasons, they're willing to put in the commitment. And that's something really important. Um, One of the things our students talk about also is that even with how much she was capable of and how much she accomplished, she never became arrogant. They talk about, I mean, in general, they talk about, how precious every single person was, how they could see how much she cared for them, how sincere she was in everything she did. But they also talk about that when she started the movement, of course, she brought in other teachers. And over time, when the movement grew, she brought in more teachers. And Agudas Yisrael also became partnered with her and kind of in a certain way took over the movement, right? They had a huge network around the world. There were a lot of Rabbanim involved. And so they kind of, took over the movement in a certain way. Of course, she was always, the face of the movement and the like soul behind the movement, but they kind of took over. And the students talk about how even when there were other teachers who came and who were so loved by the girls, and who may be different than her in a lot of ways and different personality and things like that, and the girls loved those students as well. They would talk about how happy she was to see how much the students loved their other teachers, and how much respect she had for other teachers, who were maybe much younger than her, right, or again very different than her, but she showed so much respect towards them, and that when Agudas Yisrael would run events, trying to spread Beis Yaakov, she would stand in the back, right? And she didn't. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about people knowing who she was. It wasn't about her being front and center. She was just happy as long as the movement was growing, and it was never about her. So she was willing to put in all that effort to deal with all the people who were doubting her and mocking her, and to spend those sleepless nights working hard and taking all of her money and time and energy and everything and devoting it to Beis Yaakov. But when it became a success, she was willing to stand in the background and it wasn't about her. It was never about her. It was just about sincerely doing something that was so important for the Jewish community. It had to be done. They also talk about she was so involved. Again, she started Beis Yaakov and she was, of course, teaching them a lot of Torah. But Beis Yaakov was about a lot more. Part of the Beis Yaakov curriculum was a lot of chesed activities. They would go out. She would go every day and collect tzedakah for people in need, not for Beis Yaakov, for people in need. And she would take her students with her to go and to knock on doors and to ask people for money for those in need. She did so many things. She was always available to someone if someone was sick or anything. She was always available to go to do whatever she had to do, or she would, have the girls stop whatever they were doing and daven for someone who was sick or whatever had to be done. She was always happy to help. And she started Benos. Beis Yaakov was the school part, right? And Benos was also like they would have a few hours a week. And it was where they had lessons there also. They had shiurim and they learned together in Benos. But Benos was to take the learning that they had done and to apply it into real life. And so they would, through Benos, they would do a lot of chesed activities. They would have more of the experience of Torah, right? And they would, again, like, have like tzedakah committees and they would have like, events that they would do and they would do different things to, again, make the Torah that they were learning part of a full experience. And her students would talk about like seeing her every day. Here was a woman, she was so busy, right? She was so, and again, we're talking about the point where she was already, Beis Yaakov was huge and there was so much that had to be done. And she would be going door to door to knock on people's doors for a few cents. And people would say to her, like, why don't you just go, like, it's kind of like embarrassing and undignified. Like, why don't you just go to the few rich people? They'll give you a certain amount of money. She was known. They could give her, a certain amount of money and you'll use that money for your tzedakah endeavors. And she would say, no, it's so important. Like every few cents I get that I collect means that like there's so much zechus from that. There's a zechus for the giver. There's a zechus for me. I get to be part of that. And there's a zechus for the person receiving it, right? Who now, will receive what they need. And to be part of this mitzvah, like it doesn't matter if it's 5 cents. It doesn't matter how much money it is. It's so important to be part of this mitzvah. Nothing was ever beneath her. It was never like too undignified for her. And her students, they talked a lot about this, the experience of collecting tzedakah and of recognizing that like, you can put yourself out a little, and be a little uncomfortable and in a little bit of an awkward situation if it means being able to help someone do the mitzvah of giving 5 cents to tzedakah. So, that was something that, again, she wasn't just someone who was an intellect, who wanted to start schools because she was like some sort of feminist. Kas v'chalila, it wasn't that at all, right? She was someone who was doing this because she wanted to spread what it means to be a Torah Jew, to love Hashem, to live for Hashem, right? To do everything we can to do mitzvos at the highest level, to do all kinds of mitzvos, whether it's learning whether it's davening, whether it's collecting tzedakah, whether it's cooking food for someone, whatever it is, that, all of this is part of living a Torah life. And we never want anything, to be beyond us. We want to be a part of everything. And her students talk about, there are so many beautiful stories that talk about her students as older women, years later, older women who were continuing to go door to door. They could barely walk, they could barely make it door to door, but they would go door to door, collecting a few dollars here and there just to be able to be part of this mitzvah of collecting tzedakah. That was an impact that she had on her students. They never stopped. They understood the message of what she was saying. Again, nothing is beneath us. Every moment is precious. There's so many things that we can do to make our service of Hashem better. And her students took that with them for the rest of their lives. And again, they never stopped until their last day. They continued to work. They continued to teach, to give tzedakah, to be part of chesed, to be warm and loving to those around them, because they appreciated that serving Hashem means all of these different aspects of life, these different dimensions of Torah, and they wanted to be part of all of those. That's what she instilled in them. And they would say, we had to do all of these things because we understood Torah wasn't just about being an intellect and learning. Torah wasn't just about this or that. Torah was everything. And so we'll go anything we have to do, we'll do to to celebrate all the different aspects of Torah, all the different kinds of mitzvos, because that's what our teacher did. Um, and this was really, I think, a lot of what we discussed in our course this year was about how we can learn from Sarah Schenirer. Like, what did she do that had such an impact on her students? Like, how can we recreate that in our communities to make sure that we are raising women and men who are going to be heroes of the Jewish people and who are going to, again, do these things where it's above and beyond, being a Tzelem Elokim to the fullest meaning of the word. And one of the things that we saw that she did is that she was so successful because she embodied what she taught. It's very easy to say the words. And again, a lot of times, in our communities, people don't necessarily know their teachers, right, beyond what they see in the classroom. But what she was is that it was truly who she was. Everything she taught them, they could see it was a part of who she was. When she taught, when she would teach them about loving Hashem or Yiras Hashem, whatever she would teach them, it was so clear that's who she was through and through. And they talk about that. They talk about what it means to be in the presence of someone who is a true Yarei Shamayim, that's a privilege, right? And they saw when she would talk about making every moment of the day count, they saw it. Again, there were many girls who dormed. The girls who lived in Krakow didn't dorm, but the girls who dormed, they would talk about that. They would see her at night. She would stay up the entire night because she had to work as a seamstress to make money to support Beis Yaakov. She had to prepare teaching materials, right? There was nothing. She had to prepare her classes, prepare materials. She sent the materials that she hand wrote, right? She had to hand write everything. And she would send the materials to her students in different schools right across Europe. She was the center of all of Beis Yaakov. And so she had so much responsibility to her students and to the entire Beis Yaakov network. She was at the core of everything and she was keeping everything alive and going. And they talked about how they would see her every moment counted, right? Every moment counted. She couldn't even sleep because there was precious work that had to be done. Time is so precious. And so then she would teach them. And she had a few psukim and a few teachings that she would repeat very often. And they're on every document, every letter she sent, she would include these psukim. And one of them is make every moment count. Every moment needs to count, right? From the pasuk, Lemnos Yamenu Kein Hoda, right? She would say every moment needs to count. And she didn't have to say those words because they saw it in how she behaved. And so everything she talked about, it was powerful because they lived it being near her. They saw that she truly meant it, that it was a part of who she was, and they wanted to be like her. They were so overwhelmed by who she was, they just wanted to be like her. And again, part of that was also that she was such a warm and loving person, that she really was so motherly to them. When one of her students talks about, how she would stay up so late at night, she mentions that she was a young girl. She was sleeping in the room. And again, Sarah Schenirer had this little apartment that before they eventually grew and got a bigger building, at first they were in her apartment. In the day they would, learn and have all their daily activities in this room. And then at night they would push everything aside and have their beds, right? They were able to, make do. Like she didn't, she didn't stop Beis Yaakov because she didn't have a fancy building, right? She did what had to be done. And the girl talks about what it was like to live in Sarah Schenire's house. And she said she woke up one day in the middle of the night and she heard noise. So she went to see what was happening. And she saw in the other room, there was Sarah Schenirer, preparing her lessons and working and doing everything that she could. And she says like she was overwhelmed to see like it was 4 in the morning and there Sarah Schneer is. She hasn't gone to sleep yet because there's too much work that has to be done. And she said she went back into bed and a few minutes later, she sees Sarah Schneer open the door and come into the room. And she walks by each of the beds. She straightens the blankets. She makes sure the girl is comfortable. And she said it was like a mother who would go and check her children. And this was a regular night. This girl happened to wake up this night. And she said there was Sarah Schneer walking between the beds to make sure that each girl is comfortable and is, having a good night's sleep. Again, like someone who, I mean, I don't know how many parents are doing this every night to go through and to make sure each of their children's, blankets are comfortable and haven't fallen off, right? But here was someone, she was so busy. These weren't even her children, right? She was already taking care of them beyond what anyone would expect of her, right? But she was so loving to them. And this student talks about, you know, how overwhelming it was for them when they knew how much she loved her, and they so badly wanted to be good people. They wanted to make her proud. They didn't want to disappoint her. They wanted her to be proud of who she was, and she didn't have to rebuke them, right? There didn't have to be any official discipline, because even just seeing that they disappointed her was enough to make them never do it again. They just wanted to impress her, and they could see again what Torah makes, what the consequences of being a Torah person is to be someone like Sarah Schneer. And that was less than enough for them. And that was what, again, Pearl Banish says, it's what kept them going. Seeing who she was, how she just danced and sung with the girls, that was the image that kept them going through Auschwitz, through the torture, the trauma. They came out as strong human beings, as healthy, loving human beings, even after what they had witnessed and been through. And it's because Sarah Schneer was there, and she just exuded love and warmth and avas Hashem, that even in the darkest, most painful times, we love Hashem, and Hashem, his plan is perfect and everything's going exactly according to plan. We just have to, remember how much we love him, right? And to be committed to serving him. I wanted to, show you one of the stories. And again, you have, to really get the full experience, you have to go back and read so many books on this topic, read them yourself. I'm going to provide a reading list for anyone who's interested that I'll put now in the chat. If you're not on the Livnos group, this is a way that, if you email me, I can send you the reading list. I can send you some recordings and things of classes so that you can see, more. And you can read the story straight from her students and get the full experience of what it means to be, part of Beis Yaakov. But here's a beautiful story where I think you just see like what kind of person Beis Yaakov created. Just such a good person, such a hero. And let's see, this is a story that took place. Pearl Banish talks about her experience when she arrived in Auschwitz. Now, Tila Orlean was one of the first students of Sarah Schneer, and she was one of the early teachers in Beis Yaakov. And even just her story itself is overwhelming. She was the leader of Benos at one point, or maybe, I don't know exactly how it works. She was like maybe the head teacher in Benos. And Sila went to Auschwitz, and she spent a few years in Auschwitz during the war, and she became high up in Auschwitz, and she used her position to save so many lives, to stand up to the Nazis, to do things that, again, like we can't even imagine a person is capable of, or like a person would do. But Sila and her Beis Yaakov girls, they had like, a resistance in Auschwitz. It's like overwhelming when you see the stories of who they were, and they were seeing so much trauma, so much loss. It's just horrifying. But here was Tila Orlean, who was one of the heroes of Beis Yaakov, who again was an early student of Sarah Schneer, and then joined as one of the staff, right? And again, she was part of Benos, which again, Benos was teaching both. It was teaching Torah, but it was also teaching how Torah enables us to live a life of heroism. So here, Pearl Banish says they showed up in Auschwitz. They're saying there, it's like, it can't get more horrible, right? It's just, we're getting to the point where like, there's no human experience that can be more horrible than what they've been going through. And this is what happens when she shows up. Good Shabbos, girls, Tila said after recognizing us. Good Shabbos? How do those two words sound when uttered in front of the towering crematorium chimney, belching fire and black smoke? How do they sound when one's nostrils smell the stench of burning human flesh? Good Shabbos, girls, Tila repeated, smiling, eyes sparkling with joy. Yes, this was Frau Schneer's Talmidah, greeting her greeting us in her teacher's authentic way, telling us that even in this jungle of existence, it is Shabbos. The Shabbos queen does not respect boundaries. She vaults the barbed wire and the electric fences to visit us. Although we offer her only two paper-thin slices of bread for Kiddush, we receive and greet her with joy, the joy of being alive, the joy of being Jewish, the joy of keeping our hearts pure in this pit of evil, amidst this ugliness of human decay. Thanks to our late teacher, her Talmidah, and the Shabbos queen, we will never become such beasts as our oppressors are. Right here, that she talked a few times. She mentioned this story throughout the books, and she would talk about what it meant to remember Shabbos. That Sarah Schenirer would always greet them. Shabbos was like a whole different existence. How could anyone be anything but happy on Shabbos? It's so beautiful. We're so lucky. We're so lucky to have Shabbos. We're so lucky to be able to be people who can connect to Hashem, to learn Torah. It's such a privilege to be part of the Jewish people. And here she talks about the story, always referencing it and saying, there we were in Auschwitz saying a Shabbos to each other. Because even through all of the horrors they had experienced, it was Shabbos. And they remembered, Frau Schenirer, she loved Shabbos. And Tila Orlean, she loved Shabbos. Something for us to think about and to see, first of all, again, that when someone is truly connected to Hashem and understands what it means to be a Jew, to be alive, to have the Torah, nothing can take that away. And we can be happy through anything. And we can be people who are truly happy. Here they were truly happy. Pearl Banish came out and she was such a happy, loving person. All these women, they were so happy and loving. And all of that is because Sarah Schenirer taught them, like, when you love Hashem, when you have a relationship with him, it can be so happy, right? And also, I think even for myself, since I read this story, I think about this on Shabbos, and to just remember, like, here we are, we Baruch Hashem, live such beautiful lives. Hashem has been so good to us. He's given us so much. And maybe we have certain challenges. Each of us probably have something which is a little difficult. But to remember that we're so lucky, like Shabbos comes and it's such a beautiful day. It's such an opportunity. And part of the legacy Sarah Schenirer gave was not just learn Torah, have schools, do this, collect tzedakah, but it's also to love Shabbos. Shabbos comes and it's overwhelming how lucky we are. It's like it's hard to kind of sum up so much in a short amount of time. But one of the things also that we see, like if you look at To Vanquish the Dragon, you look at again, stories of Tila Orlean, Pearl Banish, Tila Orlean's student. Tila Orlean was a teacher in Beis Yaakov right after she was a student. So in one of the Beis Yaakov she taught in, not in Krakow, she had a student, Tilly. And Tilly ended up becoming her assistant in Auschwitz. And it talks about, like, here was Tilly. I mean, these girls, when the war started, they were in their early 20s. Tila Orlean was a little bit older. She was the teacher, but she wasn't much older. She was like a few years older. These women were young women in their early or late 20s. I don't remember exactly how old Tila Orlean was, but like at most like around 30 or something when she showed up in Auschwitz. And it talks about, Pearl Banish records these rescue missions that Tilly and Tila would go on, and Tilly's friend and the Beis Yaakov girls, she would literally describe these situations where they were trying to like save someone from the gas chambers. So they would be like scurrying at night, like hiding behind things as they were being shot at. She talked about the times that they were shot at, like Pearl Banish herself, the time that she was being shot at. Why? Because they had saved a little bit of food to give to one of the rabbis who they didn't feel was getting enough food. So they had, smuggled food out of the kitchen, which itself was something they could have been easily killed for, right? And they would go scurrying in the shadows to bring it to him. Like, it's like something really that you can't imagine. Like people like this exist. It's like if we didn't know what happened, we could never believe someone could do this. It's so beyond. It's like a movie, right? That these girls are literally these Beis Yaakov girls, 23-year-old girls, right, who are literally smuggling food, saving lives. I mean, Pearl Banish talks about one night when Tilly was out there in one of her rescue missions, saving Pearl Banish's life. She saved a few girls' life, and she says that Tilly Rinder was there, and after she saved Pearl Banish and they, brought them scurrying through the shadows, she said, okay, I have to go now, because she had to go save someone else's life. It's like this was every night was multiple rescue missions, saving people from the Nazis. It's like, it's beyond. And again, all of this went back because Tilly Rinder was in Beis Yaakov with Tila Orlean as her teacher. And Tila Orlean was in Sarah Schneer's Beis Yaakov. And they gained this heroism that it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Whatever had to be done to help someone else, whatever had to be done to champion the Torah, to to stand up for the truth, whatever it was. Like these girls were capable of doing everything, anything and everything. And again, after the war, the thing about the war that's so overwhelming to see is that we might not have appreciated who Sarah Schenirer was and what Beis Yaakov was if we didn't see that Beis Yaakov enabled these girls to confront these insane challenges, right? The war year shows us what they were capable of because of what they had experienced in Beis Yaakov. And Pearl Banish talks about that again. What they were doing in the camps was overwhelming. But even after these camps, these girls, these group of girls that Pearl Banish talks about, her friends that she had from Beis Yaakov, they were now in their late 20s. And again, they had gone through so much. They had lost their families. They had been through Auschwitz. They'd been through one after another horrible experience, overwhelming, right? Like things that like, how could a person possibly move past, right? It's just overwhelming. And she said that like there they were in the DP camps, starting schools, giving people, a message of hope, of love Hashem. They had these little children who were, of course, who were survivors, who had lost their parents, who knew nothing about what it means to be a Torah Jew, right? Only that, if you're a Jew, they're going to kill you, right? That's all people knew. Some of these little kids, right? And they had no Torah, they had no family, and they were traumatized. They were little children who only knew war, right? It was just so horrifying. And Pearl Banish talks about that in those DP camps, they enlisted the help of the Beis Yaakov girls. She talks about through the war and after the war, people knew if you could find a Beis Yaakov girl, you were saved. They could do anything. They would do anything. They would save the Jewish community. And she describes that in all the different camps, they had Beis Yaakov girls who established schools and homes and groups to give warmth and love to the children and to the adults, whoever needed, right? To help them reestablish their lives, to help them, receive warmth and love, to create, new families, right? To do whatever had to be done to try to piece together, to put back together their lives. And again, she talked about like throughout the war, they always knew if a Beis Yaakov girl was around, like she would provide warmth, love, protection, strength, Torah. It's like overwhelming. These little girls, and she talks about again during the war and especially after the war when they were rebuilding, that there were like rabbanim who were leading the community, and they were having a hard time like doing certain things, and then the group of Beis Yaakov girls would show up to help, and the Rav would say like, okay, phew, if we have Beis Yaakov girls, they're capable of anything. They were like literally superheroes. That's what it's like reading about. It's like you look at this and you're thinking like, how could they accomplish that without superpowers? And it just like, and that bravery that comes just from being a student of Sarah Schenirer, not from any superpower, not because, they were invincible, but because they would do anything. Like with Torah and truth and Hashem on their side, they could do anything. It really proves to us the success of what Sarah Schenirer was doing, and really, again, the potential of what our chinuch can look like as well, right? We're capable of giving ourselves, our children, our students, the entire Jewish people, so much strength. If we only, knew that it was there, it's there. It's right there in the Torah. We can give over that strength as well. One of the things also to talk about with her movement that's so important for us to remember is that, at that time in the Jewish community, there were a lot of divisions in the Frum community, right? Between the Hasidim, from the Hasidim and the Litvish and right, all those different groups and the Hersheyans, and, there were groups from all over. And again, even within these groups, there are different groups, right? There was a lot of division at this time within the Jewish community. And what her students show is how much achdus there was when they would all become part of Sarah Schneer's Beis Yaakov. That this Sarah Schneer's Beis Yaakov went beyond any boundaries. It was something that was so needed in the community that everyone welcomed it. And everyone, these girls in Beis Yaakov, they would join together in her school, right? They were from such different backgrounds, and the teachers were from such different backgrounds, but it was all with respect. It was all with an understanding that there's a larger mission here, which is that we're all devoted to serving Hashem. And so it's not about, the externals. It's not even about the nuances in Hashkafa. It's about the fact that at the core, we all believe that our lives have to be 100% devoted to serving Hashem. And so that just shows you how powerful her movement was, right? To break all of those boundaries. Now, we mentioned before that Sarah Schenirer had certain psukim and teachings that she would often discuss. We can't, we're getting to the end now. It's, we of course can't go in detail in all the things that she discussed, but there was one thing that really stood out to me that I think is so important for us to keep in mind. It can really impact our lives, and it has impacted mine. She talked about the pasuk Ivdu as Hashem b'simcha, right? About serving Hashem with joy. One of the things she talks about is that when someone has true avodas Hashem, 100% avodas Hashem, then they're going to be a happy person, right? It's going to make them into a really happy person. And she would say that 99% of Avodas Hashem is not enough. It takes sincere, full, complete Avodas Hashem to make a person into that happy person who is happy. Serving Hashem makes us happy, but only if we're doing it correctly. Um, and they would talk about how she was so happy. And, even again, like this was someone, she didn't live an easy life. Um, and yet she was so happy because she served Hashem. And she felt always this overwhelming feeling of the privilege of being part of the Am Yisrael, of being part of Hashem's people. She was always overwhelmed. And they talked about that again, like, I think that's something so important for us, that like true happiness comes from doing everything we can to serve Hashem. And recognizing that it's not about external things. Again, Sarah Schenirer didn't have the joy of becoming a mother, but that's not the definition of what makes someone happy. What makes someone happy is doing everything they can to serve Hashem. And even though we all have challenges, we all have things that don't go the way that we wanted them to, right? But if we recognize that whatever situation Hashem puts us in, it's in that moment we can do whatever we can. He put us in that situation. It's perfectly prepared for us. It was perfectly decided for us. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't because, there wasn't enough, children to go around. It was because Hashem put us in that exact situation. And to use that situation to serve Hashem 100%, that creates joy. And again, you think about Sarah Schenirer, the feeling she had when she looked at her girls and she saw what she had created, so much happiness because she never gave up. She never doubted herself. She never got mad at Hashem because he didn't do what she wanted. She understood Hashem put her in a situation, and in that situation, she'll serve him. And you know what? Maybe she wanted to have a huge family of children that she could raise to serve Hashem, but that wasn't what Hashem had in mind for her. He had something else, and she ended up raising this entire generation of the Jewish people and all the future generations. But also, again, it's important to remember, like, our students talk about the simcha that comes from serving Hashem, also the simcha that comes from giving others. Pearl Banish talks about this a lot, that when she was in Auschwitz, and like, what joy was there in Auschwitz? It was horrifying. What joy. But she says the joy that we had was we would remember that Sarah Schenirer would teach us, when you give to others, you're happy. And so she talked about in Auschwitz, she said, even when I had nothing to give, I could always find something to give to someone else. Maybe just a smile. Maybe just a smile. And she says in Auschwitz, I would smile at someone. I would do this. I would do that. She said, and then I felt alive. Right? And Pearl Banish says, that's what she discusses in a few different places. She says, if you give, you live. Right? That giving to others is what brings us true happiness. And that was what they saw from their teacher. And that got them to the darkest of times, even when they had nothing to give. Right? How many of us have nothing to give? But she said, we always have the ability to smile, to say thank you, to greet someone. And that was, that brought them happiness. One of the stories actually that I just loved is you see Pearl Banish and these girls, they had such, they were so, in certain ways, they were very serious. Obviously, they had been through a lot, and there was a lot that they had to champion and stand up for. But you see, they were always laughing. Like Pearl Banish talks about how much they laughed, like during the war and throughout their lives. They were always laughing together. A lot of the other books also talks about how happy, like they all had a sense of humor, and Sarah Schenirer had a sense of humor, and they were very happy people. They weren't just like serious, stoic, like intellects. Like they were very happy, fun people with a lot of life. Pearl Banish talks about that Sarah Schenirer always greeted everyone, that we're supposed to greet people, and Sarah Schenirer always greeted people. And Pearl Banish said that when she was younger, it was always her goal to try once to greet Sarah Schenirer first. So she describes this story where once she almost did it. She saw Sarah Schenirer from afar, and she started to open her mouth, and Sarah Schenirer greeted her first. And she said, no matter what, I was never able to greet her first. She always was so excited, so warm. She was always greeting people. And, such a beautiful thing, right? That's who Sarah Schenirer was. So warm, so excited to see people, right? Always greeting them first, right? Always giving people that dignity and respect and warmth, right? When she saw them. Here, let's see. I don't even know. I have a story here. I don't even know which one. Oh, here. Oh, okay. Here it just, in the back of Distinguished the Dragon, Sila Orlean talks here, right? And I think this is just a beautiful thing to see. She says, again, Distinguished the Dragon is a story that records the story of the Beis Yaakov girls as they went through the war, right? And showing how the Beis Yaakov education prepared them for this. So Rebbetzin Sila Orlean Suretskin, right, wrote this, right? This was all many years later. She writes, this is tangible evidence of the kind of education which the Beis Yaakov movement imparted to the Jewish girls of Poland. Day in and day out, they withstood the ultimate test. Their behavior during those terrible war years constituted fulfillment of the commandment to love Hashem your God with all your soul and all your might. And of this it was said, now I know that you are truly a God-fearing person, right? That's what these girls were, right? Their teacher and them, right? They were people who fulfilled all of the things that Torah tells us, right? Loving Hashem, even in the darkest times, right? Being givers, warm, loving people. That's what a true Torah education should prepare us for. And I just leave off with a few questions to consider of like, based on what we discussed today, and again, I encourage you all to go learn more about this. And again, you can be in touch with me. Pearl Banish's books are amazing. Daughters of Destiny is great. And, Rebbetzin Vichna Kaplan, these are all really wonderful books that are really worth looking at yourself. And again, you can be in touch with me for the recordings of our course. But just, to consider, because again, the point of learning about all of this and talking about Sarah Schenirer is not because it's something that happened in the past that we should, just say like, wow, that's nice, and move on. But it's something to consider, like, based on the things we discuss and based on, other things we know about her, like, how did she set up this movement, this chinuch, right? That it created such powerful women, such loving women, like people who are again full of life and givers and strong. And, even people like, Mir Hashem, we shouldn't have the experiences that they had of having to use Torah in a way of standing up to these horrible enemies, right? But even just like day to day, to create people who are loving, who are, welcoming to others, who are passionate about Torah, who are proud to be Jews, who are happy, how to create that kind of thing, to really consider like, what did she do? And how can we put that in today? Again, I don't know each of you who are listening to this, right? But for those of us who are, mothers or teachers or whatever, so then, how to make that a part of your home, a part of your teaching, right? But even for all of us, like no matter who you are, we are all people who, can do so much good in this world, who other people, are impacted by, right? How can we live our lives in ways that we give over this message as well? How do we become, first of all, more like Sarah Schenirer ourselves? Because again, it's not just about, having other people become heroes, right? But Sarah Schenirer first was someone who embodied what she taught, right? How can we first build that up within ourselves? And then how can we build that up in others? How can we give that, again, through teaching, formal teaching, informal teaching, right? In the home, in the community, how can we give that over to create these strong women, right, to give over the Torah mission? She gave over a mission of Torah, a mission of teaching, a mission of living as a person of chesed and kindness, right? How can we give that over? How was she able in her classes, in her little, apartment, to create women who were warriors, literal warriors, right? Even figurative warriors of Torah and the Jewish people, but who actually in a time of war became warriors and were able to save lives. I mean, it's like overwhelming. It's really overwhelming. And here I'll just show you one piece here. Right, this is something that Pearl Banish these women, the way they write, it's just overwhelming. And Pearl Banish, everything she says, it's so powerful. And she says here, be one of the Talmidos of Sarah Schenirer, went the slogan in the hearts of the girls and women who knew her. Their teachers' followers give testimony to her greatness. By emulating her ways, devoting themselves to her ideals, and perpetuating her goals, they bore witness to our mentor's superior virtues. They acted as she did, with love, caring, and kindness, even to the point of forfeiting their lives. It's when you read the stories, it's overwhelming to see how much they lived by what she had taught them to the end, right? To the end throughout everything. And again, her mission of Torah, it's the mission of Torah. Sarah Schenirer was a powerful woman. The mission she was giving over was not a new mission. It was the mission that women have given over to the next generation. Men and women have given over our entire history. It's what enabled us to get here. And it's the mission of Torah. And to remember that this mission is still alive. This is not just a woman who lived in the past, but it's a woman who created a new generation and expected them to continue the Masorah. And it's the next generation, and each of us gives over the Masorah, and we expect the next generation to do it as well, to do whatever they can to keep the Masorah alive and to give that Masorah to the next generation. And now it's our turn. And so for us, to talk about her and to remember, here we are, 91 years after her passing, and her mission is still alive, it's still important. And each of us, what can we do to add to that legacy, to champion that legacy. And again, it's in learning Torah, it's in teaching Torah, it's in doing chesed, it's in giving tzedakah, it's in being a warm, welcoming person, non-judgmental, kind, compassionate, seeing a need, helping others, davening for them. So many different ways to give that really we should be doing them all. That's what we as Torah people want to do. We want to do them all, be a part of all of it. But again, to be, to think consciously, what am I doing to be part of this movement, of this message, of this legacy, and to continue building, to continue what she created, but to build on it and to do more. That's what she did. That's what her students did. They continued to build and to do even more to keep it alive. And again, if you want to discuss this more, please feel free to email me. If any of you are not on the Livnos, subscription list, you can also go. I'll put that also in the thing here. Feel free to go to Livnos, see what other, resources and events and classes that we have. But again, there's so much that can be done, and we can all play a role in that. We should. We're Yahrtzeit Elokim, and her message was, you can do anything. It should never be, from a place of like arrogance or anything. It's from a place of, this is what Hashem gave us. He gave us the ability to do anything. We have endless potential, and with his help, we can be successful. Okay, thank you so much for listening. It's a huge privilege to be a part of this. And I appreciate that each of you has contributed to this and to helping us to continue this beautiful, beautiful tradition. Okay, any questions? Or I know there are a few experts on Beis Yaakov here. So if anyone would like to add. Hudi, Racheli, you guys are both students of Sarah Schenirer as well. So thank you for joining.
I thought you did a really good job, and you really summed it up. I think like she is a very, like, even though, like you said, it was like over 100 years ago when she started all this, her lessons of like how she built it up and what she saw, what was needed, and like really, really dedicated herself to it, is like applicable to all times. I think it's good that they have this Yahrtzeit remembrance. Yeah. Also, not so many women throughout history that were leaders in this capacity. A lot of times, like the very important women were known like through their husbands or fathers or, men in their lives. So to see a woman who on her own right, without being like a feminist or just being like a very good role model for what it means to be a Jewish woman on her own is also very inspiring and very like hard to find. So I think it's a very important need to remember her and talk about her.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. When I first started Livnos, someone said to me, one of my friends said, like, I think it's very nice that you're starting this, but why are you starting it if no Rav started it? So I thought it was such a funny question. Like, I was like, do you think that I was like, well, why should any Rav start something? Because why didn't the Gadol Hador start it? Like, should no one ever start something ever for him? Like, he'd be really busy, So I think it's interesting to see, like what you're saying. It's very unusual to have, I mean, maybe, a more modern history after her, right? It's more common, but until her time, it's so unusual to see a woman who just as an individual woman, just, not famous because of her husband, not through her husband, but just accomplished so much. Like, it's really a lesson for us of like, we can all start something. We don't need to, and again, success doesn't mean starting a huge movement that's going to be famous, right? Success just means that whatever need you see, right, addressing it, even if it's a small need, like whatever you do is so important, but just going beyond yourself, right? Thank you, Racheli. Thanks for joining. Okay, anyone want to add anything or? Okay, well, thank you to everyone who joined us. And again, please feel free to email me if you want any more resources. And Yahrtzeit Hashem, we should, use this day and we should see a lot of growth, a lot of inspiration, and being able to become true, as Pearl Banish says, to become a Talmidah of Sarah Schenirer. That's very high praise. And Yahrtzeit Hashem, we should be zochet to do that. Okay, have a great day. Thank you for joining.